Now, on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app, Vince Colonnese.
Hey, good afternoon to you. It's 4:07 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Coming up, John Lott will join us from the Crime Prevention Research Center. That's at 5 o'clock. We'll talk to him about the data the FBI needs to take a closer look at and tell the truth about under the leadership of Kash Patel. That'll be a good conversation. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. As always, has been very busy around here. We were at CPAC last week, and that's where I met our next guest. Lisa Ekman joins us now. She was a 20-year Democratic operative and did that for a while. And then she decided she didn't want to do it anymore. She left the Democrat Party, and she wrote a book about it. The book is called Deprogramming Democrats and Uneducating the Elites, How I Escaped the Progressive Cult. Lisa, good to have you with us today.
It is a pleasure to be with you today, Vince. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
I'm so grateful that you're doing it. So give us a sense of your story. Tell us, how did you get into Democrat politics in the first place?
So I was actually getting my master's in social work degree, and I got nominated for a program called the Presidential Management Intern Program. And it was a program created by Jimmy Carter designed to pull people with graduate level education into federal service. And so I was the president of my student association at the University of Denver Social Work School, and my dean decided that they wanted to nominate me to head to Washington, D.C., and I ended up working directly for a political appointee in the Clinton administration at the very tail end of the Clinton administration, and that's how I got pulled into politics and policy in Washington, D.C.
Are there Republican social workers? When you say social worker, I think most people sort of reflexively assume Democrat.
In general, I would say that is probably 100% correct. The level of political correctness, even back in the 90s in social work school, was off the charts. I remember having a conversation in one of my classes about white privilege, and I remember getting piled on because by my classmates without much help from my professor, because I took the position that more besides the color of your skin matters when it comes to whether or not you have advantage in this country. Whether you're born into a family with two parents, for example, has a big impact, and whether or not you're poor or you are growing up with finances, a better financial situation. And those two things combined, when you control for that, it actually takes a lot of the income differential based on race that we find if you control for poverty and you control for growing up in a stable two-parent family.
That's right. That is the biggest indicator, isn't it? The research I've seen on this shows that how many parents you have at home is the single biggest indicator of your chances of economic success or failure going into the future. If you're a person who's in the bottom quintile, that is the bottom 20% of the economic picture in the country, and you only have one parent at home, your chances of staying in the bottom 20% are sky high. But if you have two parents, you have an equal chance at making it into any one of the quintiles, which is a really good thing for someone who's growing up in that situation.
I 100% agree, and I think that that's pretty spot on what the research says, and I think that is a huge indictment of our welfare system in this country, because it really penalizes parents if they get married. You can't receive any cash assistance or any help, and so it encourages single parent families. And while I give a big shout out to every single mom, it's a very difficult job. It also does have a strong negative correlation with successful outcomes for children. And so pointing this out in my social work class went over like a lead balloon, as you might imagine. And I did end up, back in those days, I was still able to get a good grade in that class and graduate from the program. And I think one of the things that I talk about in the book is how much the left has changed. Now I probably would have been canceled. I might have been doxxed and called all sorts of nasty names online, as the leftists want to do. So I think that is a big thing that I do point out, as many Democrats who are no longer Democrats, former
Yes.
Democrats say, I didn't leave the party, it left me. It
Sure.
became radicalized and moved so far to the left, it was not a party I recognized anymore.
Sorry, if you don't mind, I do want to dwell on social work for one more moment, which is,
oh, sure.
when I think of social work, it seems from the outside, I haven't done this work, so I'll take your word for it. It seems from the outside that nominally it's supposed to be about helping struggling people. That's the way it's sold. It's like, hey, a social worker is the kind of person who goes in and helps somebody meet their basic needs. But what I understand it to be is not helping people overcome the challenges that they're facing, but instead to get into a pattern of maintenance where they sort of maintain it and they become dependent on the government. Is that how it works?
I think that I wouldn't want to draw as broad a brush to say that across the board, but I think in many instances, unfortunately, that is what ends up happening. I think that a lot of social workers' jobs are to identify resources for individuals.
Yeah.
And to be, those resources often come in the form of government programs. And
Right.
to be fair to most social workers, they are also overworked, and therefore they can't take steps beyond just connecting people with the programs.
Yeah.
And so social workers often end up being a way to assist people to get
Right.
more dependent on the system.
Right. So they become Sherpas. They become Sherpas for government dependency, whether they intend to or not.
Correct. I think also, though, I would just say also back to the beginning of our conversation, that's going to vary significantly depending on what the socioeconomic level of their clients are. So if you have a social worker in a more affluent area, they may be able to actually help solve some of the problems.
I see.
Simply because they're better resourced as well.
All right. So you describe it as being kind of locked into this world where the party ends up leaving you, but you were, for 20 years, you were considered yourself a Democrat operative, I think, very much in that party's business. What was the breaking point for you in the end?
For me, in the end, the breaking point was the violations of our First Amendment, of our God-given rights enshrined in the First Amendment to our Constitution that happened during COVID. And when I talk about this, I want to be very clear that it's not just freedom of speech, that freedom to speak, it was also compelled speech that was going on in terms of needing to use people's pronouns that they decided they wanted you to use on that particular day and compelling that speech.
Yes.
It was also freedom of association, and freedom of assembly, when people could go outside and go to a huge protest, provided it was for a Democratic-approved cause. There was no medical emergency. But if you wanted to see your grandmother in the hospital as she was dying, then you couldn't associate. And it was also the freedom to practice your religion when and where you wanted. All of these rights,
yes,
enshrined in the First Amendment, were being violated without so much as a conversation about whether or not the risks justified these type of measures. And I would like to just say that there is no public health emergency exception to our constitutional rights. Our Constitution is very clear, the government shall not in these instances.
Yes.
And so just because people are afraid does not give the right to violate these basic rights that we have, these natural rights we have enshrined by our Constitution.
What you just described, political scientists refer to as negative rights, that the government's going to stay out of your life on all of these subjects. The way the Democrats, the way the left handles the word rights is they think that rights mean anything that the government gives you. Whereas on the right, the view of what you consider a right is anywhere where the government is not allowed to infringe. And that seems a fundamental distinction between the left and the right in our country right now.
I think that is a really good point. I think that some of the rights also on the quote unquote rights that the left is pushing are not things that are inherent rights, that are not natural rights, that are God-given, and they are creating rights for people that don't necessarily exist and can exist if they are enforced by the state.
Yes.
And that's a very slippery slope to go down. And I personally don't believe that the government should be telling us what our rights are. They should be enforcing the natural rights that we already have.
So you mentioned COVID. One other area that I'd be interested in your opinion on is the COVID jab, the vaccine. The government made it mandatory for almost every organization in the country that you either get the vaccine or you're fired. And they definitely did that at the federal level to federal government employees. The Democrats for many years have used talking points to suggest that they are defenders of bodily autonomy. They'll say things like my body, my choice within the context of abortion policy. But I noticed that they didn't use that phrasing at all when it came to the COVID jab. What did you think of that?
I 100% opposed any mandates on an experimental gene therapy treatment that was not tested. I oppose those mandates whether they are fully tested or not, because we could get into a very long conversation about the co-option of science. I am very excited about when, MAGA and MAHA joined forces and that we have Robert Kennedy Jr. as Secretary of Health and Human Services to really take a look at what has happened to our agencies that are supposed to regulate the pharmaceutical industry and protect our health. Because at this point, science is not what the scientific method is supposed to be. A scientist is supposed to have no monetary interest in the outcome of a study, and all of these studies are paid for by the people who are going to make billions of dollars off of them and then have liability protection from being sued when their products hurt people. And I could not be part of a party that censored doctors, many of them, such as those that signed the Great Barrington Declaration, censored natural health care providers who said, for example, go outside, get some vitamin D,
Amen.
And that will help keep you healthy, and censors anyone who didn't buy the COVID narrative, as well as these experimental gene therapy shots, and censors anyone who didn't just conform to that.
Lisa Ekman, did you vote for President Trump in 2020 by that time?
In 2020, I actually was in the process of moving, and I was still registered to vote in Washington, D.C., where I don't say that generally your vote is a wasted vote, but a vote for Trump in Washington, D.C., where the Democrat always gets over 90% of the vote. I was sort of in between, and I didn't want to commit any voter fraud. I actually physically was living in Virginia at the time, but couldn't register to vote in Virginia yet because I hadn't moved.
So your first vote?
First time.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, for the first time, I did not vote for president since I was eligible to.
Yeah.
But in 2024, I 100% voted for President Trump.
Was that the first time you'd ever voted for a Republican?
It was not, because in 2022, I did vote for my governor in Virginia.
For president, though, I mean.
Yes, for president, that was the first time I ever voted for a Republican.
You sound like the kind of voter. First of all, I imagine you probably would have voted for him anyway if he didn't have RFK with him. But you do sound like the kind of voter who really liked that he brought RFK Jr. with him at this time.
Yes, I was 100% committed to voting for President Trump before he brought RFK Jr. on. But it's sort of, I think, to me, really, there isn't this distinction between left and right that we have been pushed to have. There is a distinction between establishment politicians, as on the right we would call them rhinos. We jokingly used to call some of the Democrats who were more centrist dinos as well. But sort of a lot of the politicians are just the left and the right wing of the same bird. And what President Trump offered was
the shotgun to take that bird down.
Yeah, to take the bird down. And I think he's bringing people like RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard on, and other former Democrats who also were wanting to take on the establishment. I think was a value add that I think did help some people who maybe couldn't have been as committed to President Trump because of the long-standing Trump derangement syndrome,
Yep.
the mainstream media's outright lies about President Trump. It might have made that vote more comfortable for them.
Sure.
For me, like I say, I was 100% committed before that happened. It just was sort of the icing on the cake for me.
Lisa Ekman, you've got the clarity of a convert. The book is Deprogramming Democrats and Uneducating the Elites, How I Escaped the Progressive Cult. Lisa, thank you very much for your time today. So nice to talk to you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
My pleasure. And it was great meeting you at CPAC. It's 4:22 now.
First thing each morning, O'Connor and Company with Larry O'Connor. Weekday mornings from 5 to 9 on WMAL.
Well, Dan Bongino is going to be headed over to become the deputy director of the FBI here some point in the near future. And the New York Times is upset about it. They have a headline up today. Trump's new deputy FBI director has it out for the, quote, scumbag commie libs. They assume that they are among the scumbag commie libs. They're getting ready. They don't like this at all. I love it. It's ahead on the Vince Colonnese Show. Hey, good afternoon to you. It's 4:35 here at News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Coming up today, John Lott from the Crime Prevention Research Center will be with us. We will chat with him about the task ahead for the FBI, including the data that they rely on to do their jobs. And how it's been very manipulated. John Lott has had to deal with this in the past, and he'll deal with it again now. We'll talk to him at 5 o'clock, and we'll talk to you at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Our very own Dan Bongino is set to become the FBI deputy director soon. You may have heard Dan talking today. He intends to continue his various broadcasts until the 14th of March. That's just a little over 2 weeks away. Not doing too much math here, but yeah, like close to 3. But it's coming. And Kash Patel, the director of the FBI, could use the help as he and Dan have a big task ahead of them. The left is outraged over this. They don't want people who are coming in to depoliticize the FBI. They don't want that institution fixed. They don't want the American people to have its trust restored. They instead want to use it as a tool of tyranny against their political opponents, which is, of course, what they've been doing for many years. Here's Senator Richard Blumenthal, whose career is defined by the lies he has told, saying today he is not happy that Dan Bongino is coming in. Take a listen to this.
And, Senator, what do you make of Dan Bongino potentially to be the deputy FBI director?
It would have been inconceivable that a person with his background would be head of the premier law enforcement investigative agency in the world.
Well, unlike you, he didn't lie about his service. The guy served in the NYPD. He served with the FBI. He worked in his capacity in federal law enforcement with the FBI, in his capacity in New York Police Department with the FBI. And he also was in the Secret Service and willing to give his life for the president of the United States. That was Barack Obama, at least one president at the time, a Democrat. He doesn't agree with his policies, clearly, but was willing to put his life on the line in the service to his country. What have you done, Richard Blumenthal? You lied about going to Vietnam.
He's a podcast ideologue without any qualification to head this investigative agency with profound and far-reaching power over people's lives.
Oh, he liked it when he controlled that agency. He loved it when he controlled those levers of power.
To enforce the law and also to potentially misuse the law.
Which you know a lot about. So that's Richard Blumenthal today. The White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavett also called out the various news outlets today who are leaving literally everything out of Dan Bongino's biography as they explain to their audiences who he is.
On the FBI, the president also announced a new deputy director of the FBI, Dan Bongino. From what has been reported, and maybe this is not accurate reporting, you can tell me, the FBI director, Kash Patel, informed Republican senators that it would be an individual named as the deputy who was a special agent currently at the FBI.
What if President Trump had a different plan? What if that's the explanation for that? What if President Trump said, actually, no, we're going to bring in Dan? Or what if that original report was just a lie to begin with?
Of course, Mr. Bongino is not. What was the reason for naming Mr. Bongino to this position? And Was Mr. Patel not correct in making that assurance to those senators?
I'm not sure if anybody in this room has listened to Mr. Bongino when he talks about the past corruption at the FBI, when he talks about his experience serving for the United States Secret Service. This is a man who loves his country and who has honorably served our country in ways that many people have not. He understands the depth of the corruption at these institutions, which the American people reelected President Trump to shake up. And I think it's quite despicable to see many networks in this room who have had chyrons on their television screens labeling Mr. Bongino as a far-right podcaster. He is not. He is a former law enforcement agent. He is a former Secret Service agent who put his life on the line to protect this country, and that is why the President of the United States has entrusted him for this important role. He's also an outsider to this Washington swamp, and we often see that when outsiders are appointed to such coveted positions, a lot of people in this city get very, very nervous, and they should be, because Dan Bongino and Kash Patel and Attorney General Bondi are focused on rooting out the corruption at these agencies and ending the weaponization of government once and for all. I'd like to end with something.
All right, so there she is there making that statement today. So Caroline Leavett, as good as always. By the way, getting better, actually, at the job. There's always a learning curve every gig you do. She is getting better, and very quickly. It's only been, a month and 5 days. She's been White House press secretary, and things are going well. Things are going very well. And she's saying exactly what needs to be said, which is, how dare you? How dare any of you? Who do you think you are? Look, and it's true. Dan is the kind of outsider you want to bring in to take a look, because if anybody, I know the media coverage of this, and I get it. There are great former FBI guys and who look at this and they say, that job is a tough job. You should really know the inner workings of the FBI. It does help if you come up through the FBI's ranks. Here's the problem. People don't trust this agency. They don't trust it. And so if the announcement was, hey, another insider has this gig, then the reaction from the voters, who, by the way, are in charge, is, it's controlled. It's rigged again. It's not. This isn't cleaning up the system. Somebody's going to be in there. They'll be scrambling the messages that get to Kash Patel. They're going to mislead. They're going to slow things down. They're not going to fix everything. I'm sorry, but if your organization loses that much trust, it needs chemotherapy. It desperately needs an uncomfortable correction to heal it. That's what it needs. And that's what Kash and Dan are going to be able to bring to this. And I'm praying for their success. I am praying, not just for them, but for all these guys, to be able to root out this corruption and get this American ship back in the right direction. It's a big deal. Speaking of the FBI and the corruption within, our friend Carrie Pickett over the Washington Times has a fascinating piece up today. The FBI is now looking, this is under President Trump, is now looking into James Comey's off-the-books honeypot operation targeting the 2016 Trump campaign. A honeypot operation. You know what a honeypot is, right? It's when you send a hot chick in, and then she flaps her goo-goo eyes at the target. Oh, I'm so interested in you. And then gets the target to spill a bunch of information, thinking that he's about to get lucky, right? The honeypot operation. Where's the FBI get these honeypots, by the way? What's the screening process like to become an FBI honeypot? Who's the talent manager for that particular mission? Unbelievable, this government. New leadership, this is carried today in the Washington Times. New leadership at the FBI is starting an investigation into the origins of the agency's plan a decade ago to infiltrate the campaign of then-candidate Donald Trump using two female undercover honeypot agents. The off-the-books investigation, launched in 2015 by former FBI Director James Comey, was revealed by an agency whistleblower in a protected disclosure to the House Judiciary Committee last year, and first reported exclusively by the Washington Times in October. In the intelligence community, a honeypot commonly refers to an undercover operative, usually a woman, who feigns sexual or romantic interest to obtain information from a target. Careful out there, fellas. Be careful out there. If you're getting unusual attraction from someone who's not normally in your league, danger, something's wrong. Either she's a psycho or she's a Fed. There's one or the other, or she's a spy. Psycho or spy. Something's happening. According to the whistleblower, 2 female FBI undercover employees infiltrated Mr. Trump's 2016 campaign at high levels and were directed to act as, quote, honeypots while traveling with Mr. Trump and his campaign staff. The Times has learned that the Bureau, now led by Director Kash Patel and Deputy Director Dan Bongino, is looking for those once undercover employees who were previously under Mr. Comey's direction. The FBI declined to comment. According to the whistleblower disclosure, which the Times has reviewed, the investigation differed from Crossfire Hurricane, a later FBI counterintelligence operation that looked into never-proved allegations that the campaign was colluding with Russia. Not only were they never proved, they were concocted allegations that the campaign was colluding with Russia. So stupid. Why would Trump need to collude with Russia to win an election? I mean, it's so ridiculous, even to this very day. The whistleblower said the early off-the-books probe was a criminal investigation targeting Mr. Trump and his staff. Mr. Trump launched his presidential campaign on June 16th of 2015, you recall that, at Trump Tower in New York City, about a year before the FBI opened Crossfire Hurricane. The whistleblower agent, this is the one who reported on the honeypot scheme, personally knew that Mr. Comey ordered an FBI investigation into Mr. Trump and that Mr. Comey personally directed it, according to the disclosure. The investigation did not appear to target any specific crime, but was more of what agents would describe as a fishing expedition to find anything incriminating that could be used against Mr. Trump. Well, yeah, you got to stop him from beating Hillary. Send in the honeypots. Send in the honeypots. That might work. The whistleblower said that the undercover operation was obscured from the Justice Department Inspector General Michael Horowitz, who investigated misconduct in the Bureau's probe of the Trump campaign. Quote, the case had no predicated foundation, so Comey personally directed the investigation without creating an official case file in Sentinel or any other FBI system, according to the whistleblower. Quote, the FBI has multiple methods of protecting highly sensitive investigations, so Comey did not have a legitimate reason not to officially create an official investigation file or have a file number. Yeah, well, it wouldn't be the first time that Comey's record keeping wasn't exactly up to FBI standards. Remember, he wrote notes about his conversation with the President of the United States, with President Trump. You remember this? He wrote notes about his conversations behind closed doors, private conversations. And then he said they were personal notes, which entitled him to leak them to the media. That's what James Comey did. It's dishonorable and insane. Oh, the FBI director met with the President of the United States in the White House. So that should be construed as a personal meeting where you take personal notes on the subject and you get to leak them to the media because you were just sending your diary out? Come on. What a scam. We paid you for every minute you were on that job. Those are our documents. But Comey did whatever he wanted. That's the lesson, of course. Comey was always doing that. Kerry Pickett continues here in the Washington Times. Additionally, the disclosure says that the secret investigation may have indicated institutional bias at the FBI against Mr. Trump. Yeah, no kidding. Though, quote, it does not appear that any information about this investigation was turned over to Trump's criminal defense counsels. So they kept it a secret. They probably found nothing. The honeypot operation probably resulted in disappointing conclusions. People didn't fall for it, apparently. They weren't able to get criminal information out about the Trump campaign. The investigation was eventually closed because a major newspaper obtained a photograph of one of the undercovers and was about to publish it. But the FBI press office told the outlet that the photograph was an FBI informant who would be killed if the photograph was publicly released. Wow, talk about melodrama. Why would a honeypot that you assigned to the Trump campaign be killed if their identity was revealed? So in other words, this is probably a resource. This honeypot is being used against actual adversaries of the United States. The kinds of countries and enemies and adversaries who would kill someone if they established their identity. So you took that valuable asset and employed it against the Trump campaign? something that is so important, so secret, that she could lose her life if her identity is revealed. You use that weapon against the Trump campaign? Well, that's even more scandalous. That's even more scandalous. Notice, by the way, that that news outlet never disclosed this, even in an anonymous capacity. They didn't recognize the fact that they had a massive story. Maybe they did. They didn't care. It was more about getting Trump than it was about telling the truth to the American people. But if you're a news outlet who's just been told by the FBI, yeah, there was an undercover informant assigned to the Trump campaign, and if you reveal that, that person's going to be killed. Well, isn't there another story here? Isn't the headline, FBI assigns undercover honeypot informant, undercover honeypot agent to the Trump campaign? Yeah, that's the story. You don't have to publish the photo. Don't get the woman killed, but tell us the truth. This is a gross abuse of the government's power. And they didn't. They didn't. So now we find out about more of this at this late date. When was all that? That was 2016? What year are we in? 2025. 9 years later. Can you even believe it? It's been that much time. The FBI, now under Kash Patel, looking into the honeypot operations that the Democrats and the deep state used against President Trump and his original presidential campaign. It's amazing how many more answers we still need. It's 4:50 now.
WMAL, making sense of the headlines because common sense isn't so common. Download the WMAL app to stream us for free.
All right, line 3 is Richard in Manassas. Richard, you're on the Vince Colonnade Show. Hello, sir.
Hey, Vince, thanks for taking my call. I had to rack my brain because it was really bugging me. Remember George Papadopoulos, when he was being investigated about the Trump-Russia collusion, there was this woman, Azra Turk, and Dan Bongino was always, who's Azra Turk? I wonder if she's not one of these FBI honeypots that, because he could never figure out I listened to Dan's podcast.
Yes.
He could never figure out who this Azra Turk woman was. And he had George Papadopoulos on his he interviewed him numerous times, and he never could figure out who this woman was.
So I've interviewed George as well about this, Richard. And in fact, Azra Turk, what you're describing, that of course did take place. That was in September of 2016. That was after Crossfire Hurricane had started. And so, in other words, the honeypots that I was just talking about, those are from a whistleblower who reveals that those predated all of the things that you just described. And you're right, it could be the same woman. But again, we're still lacking the very answers that we're demanding here. Thank goodness Dan Bongino is very read in on the details because now he's in a position to get us some answers, isn't he?
Yes, he is. I mean, this is right up there with the JFK files. I mean, not quite as monumental, but there is so much we don't know. I mean, my personal conspiracy theory is that they investigated every single Republican candidate of 2016 because Carter Page and George Papadopoulos were not with the Trump campaign to start the 2016 cycle. I believe that Papadopoulos was with the surgeon.
Ben Carson?
I'm cramping on names right. Yeah, Ben Carson's campaign before he came over to the Trump campaign. So they already had a file on him before he came over to the Trump campain.
Look, these are the tactics of like J. Edgar Hoover. It's like collecting intelligence on politicians to control them. And this was being done against President Trump in our era in order to benefit Hillary Clinton. And it has all been a spectacular disaster, totally tyrannical, and it totally needs to be cleaned up. Richard, thank you. Yeah, you have a good memory. Those are important names. George Papadopoulos, Azra Turk, honeypots being employed against the Trump campaign. It's all stuff out of a novel, except it really happened. It's so crazy. And now President Trump, speaking of crazy, this guy, somehow he made it back to the White House. And they're scared to death that he might actually get some of these answers. Up next, more on the FBI. What can they do with their data? Give us some clarity there on what's happening with crime across the country. John Lott is a man who knows all of it. He'll talk to us next.
News Talk 105.9 WMAL, making sense of the news.